Bienvenidos una vez más a este podcast de Food Tech, donde estamos recordando y también reviviendo algunas de las entrevistas que Ingrid Cubas, nuestra editora de contenidos en TFT, en The Food Tech, estuvo haciendo durante el evento. Ahí logramos poner una cabina en los pasillos para poder estar viviendo al 100% la expo, y nos acompañó Udi Lazimy, que fue uno de nuestros speakers invitados durante el evento, y vaya que tuvimos una buena plática con él, ¿no, Ingrid?
Así es, aquí también se nos unió Edgar Butler y estuvimos charlando sobre la importancia de la sostenibilidad, que cualquier compañía, específicamente en el ámbito de alimentos, requiere tener muy presente este eje en sus operaciones y sobre todo para poderse alinear con los objetivos de la ONU.
Escuchemos a Udi Lazimy platicando con Edgar y también con Ingrid.
So Udi, thank you for being here. We're in 2024 and I think sustainability isn't something that we can ignore now. So my first question to you is, how can the food industry really have an impact on UN Sustainable Development Goals to make all the food chain more sustainable?
Yeah, it's a great question and thank you for having me. I agree with you completely. Sustainability is crucial in the conversation about how do we grow phenomenal products, how do we bring products to market, because we learned over the past few years that the impact of agriculture and food is much bigger than we had originally thought, and now we understand that over 34% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture and food, and a lot of that comes from feed and the production of feed, the transformation of land to produce feed crops like corn and soy to feed animals, not humans directly. So it's a very inefficient system. Now, in thinking about how do we change that, how do we address climate change, how do we address these challenges, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 different goals, are a great framework for addressing global change. And food and agriculture, I believe, is potentially the most uniquely positioned to be able to address all of these challenges, these goals, because there's a way that you can actually think about every single goal in its impact in food and agriculture. Like food and agriculture has an impact in probably every one of the goals. I don't think it takes, it's very easy to think about that with regards to hunger alleviation, climate change, soil health, water quality. These are some of the more obvious SDGs that food and agriculture have the ability to hugely impact, but also, livelihoods, building sustainable cities, communities. One of the goals, right, is when we think about food, everybody eats, and if there's ways to incorporate sustainability in our cities directly through the food system. So there's, I think, an impact to every single goal in the food and agriculture sector, probably more than any other sector.
And how can we achieve an ethical commitment with those goals? How is that possible?
It's a good question. It really depends on the products and the operations of each company, of each product. First of all, it comes from leadership. And leadership can come not only from the very top, from the executives and CEOs, but also from the leaders within the organization. So within a food company, or within a packaging company, or within a distributor, really thinking about, okay, well, how do we identify the most important sustainability goals to our company? And that's something that we do every day with our clients, is help to identify kind of what are the leading priorities for each company. Taken as a whole, if companies are doing this, then we can create a more ethical ecosystem for addressing these different goals. But it really is company by company and target by target. GHG, water, community wealth and health, this kind of thing. Those are all components that each company has to think about what's important to us and how can we actually get to where we need to be and put the effort into doing it.
Which component is the most difficult to attend?
It really just depends. There isn't one that's more difficult than any other. I think something that might be fundamental to a company's existence. So, when we think about the biggest impacts of sustainability that a company has, studies show that agriculture and the upstream supply chain, farming, soil health, all of these things, water use, resource use, that's the biggest impact of the overall supply chain of a food company. So transportation, packaging, formulation, all of that, management, that all has an impact, but agriculture has the biggest impact. So that therefore can often be the hardest thing to change, because a lot of the time, if we're not directly vertically integrated with our farmers and suppliers, we have to influence them to actually make changes. And so that can be the most difficult, but it's certainly the most rewarding and the most impactful. And there are ways to do that. That's what we do with companies. Yeah.
And we've talked a little bit about the challenges and the key parts of the supply chain that have the most impact. And now I would like to ask you, which innovations have been implemented or are to be implemented that can make this transformation into a more sustainable, healthy supply chain are taken into place in the food industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have worked in food technology, food tech, as you know, we're all focused on here at the Food Tech Summit, for a long time. But I firmly believe that we need to think about not only what can we do, which is what can technology do, what can innovation do, but what should we do, right? And a lot of that it's subjective, nobody can say. But taken as a whole, we understand sustainability is a huge issue, and we should be working to improve the health of our climate and soil and so on, and communities. And therefore, innovations, I think, need to also not only focus on the downstream outputs of what a product looks like, what ingredients do we use, but also how are they produced and how do we incorporate the health of communities. So farmers and agriculture should not be left out of the equation. We need to really focus on agriculture and on the global community, which is the majority of humans on this planet are food producers of some sort. And so in much of the developing world, at least. So how do we make sure that we encourage good livelihoods, which I think encourages sustainability downstream? But that said, I think the development of proteins and fats, proteins especially, because they tend to have the biggest impact. So diversification of proteins is really important. Understanding not only, should we use products with the most popular proteins, plant proteins, but what new plant proteins can we use? Can we encourage growers to produce, to provide them new economic opportunities? Diversification of proteins, as well as synthetic proteins and fermentation-based proteins. And then there's some really exciting ones that I'm super excited about, like Rubisco, for example, which is a unique protein that I think we'll see innovation around in the future, which is probably the most abundant protein in the world because it comes from green leaves. It's in every green leaf, so it's involved in photosynthesis.
Kind of green leaf?
Any green leaf, because it's a protein that's involved in photosynthesis. But when extracted, it's shown to have tremendous functionality in food. So it's something that these kind of things we'll see more and more innovation from nature, but also with agriculture. That's so important because we have to think about economics and the livelihoods of people. So there's a lot. It's a lot of different opportunities. Yeah.
Nice.
And now that you told us that it's related with economics too, what can you tell about the triple bottom line that is related with all this stuff?
Yeah, that's critical to thinking about this. And that's what I generally tend to think about and work on. We so often, and for many, many years, have just focused on profit in business. And that has resulted in a over-reliance on really destructive practices, both to land and climate, as well as to people. And so we're now realizing how important the assets that upon which productivity depends, such as soil, water, people, etc., air quality, is to the growth of a business. So we think about the triple bottom line, not just profit, but environment and social, as improving resilience and mitigating risk. In the future, if we're only thinking about one bottom line, financial, we've seen time and time again that actually doesn't work. And we're going to start to face tremendous challenges if we don't actually look at a more holistic view of a supply chain, because we don't live in a vacuum.
So around all this innovation and food technology, I think, in the middle is the consumer, and it's increasing preoccupation on the sustainability of the food they're consuming. And I think something really important is for companies to communicate how sustainable their products are without being something greenwashed.
Yeah.
So how would you advise these companies, or how should these companies communicate this sustainability product?
Yeah, it's a great question, and that's probably what most consumers think about these days. Is that, it's hard to convince a consumer, which is a challenge that we should welcome. It's not like we can just tell them anything. Consumers are incredibly savvy, and especially today with all the influences of information that we receive from all over the world instantly, it's very easy to create doubt and questioning. So I think that a company should do whatever it can to utilize data to have really solid numbers. And if they're not doing something that is sustainable, they shouldn't talk about it as being sustainable. They should be honest. And honesty, of course, as in anything else, is critical. But it benefits a company to invest in things like, and invest very little, in fact, in creating assessments of the actual impact, like life cycle assessments, to determine the specific impact of a specific ingredient, a specific product. Nowadays, we might actually find that we're doing better than we had anticipated. And so you can actually talk about the numbers of how much water is used, how much greenhouse gas is emitted from a specific product, especially if you inherently think that it's good, but you don't have the numbers to back it up. Get the numbers, take the time, and then you'll eventually be able to provide much more solid information and data. And I think that it's also important that we look at and utilize certifications, and not just use kind of like meaningless labels, and names like local and it's sustainable. Okay, why, right? And so having a partnership with like a B Corp or organic or fair trade or these different certifications, if you truly are doing something, you can certify it and prove it, or you can work towards that certification so that you can share that with your audience and your consumers. I truly believe that with food, sourcing and supply chain, like upstream agriculture, as I've said, is the biggest impact. It has the broadest impact, and it has the most impact in terms of food, in terms of emissions, water use, soil health, communities, etc. So really focusing on sourcing, on understanding what are your needs what are the needs of the farmers, of the communities, and what does the science show that can actually improve and increase yields and improve soil in order to produce more in the future. That's really, really important. And how to create economic incentives for communities and farmers to kind of do the right thing and build soil and clean water and things like that. But building soil really is the most important in many ways. So.
And also work as a community, because they can share many things that will help others.
If we think of the community as not only the farmers, but also the buyers and the processors and the product developers, they're all part of that community. And so thinking about it from a broader perspective allows us to think about, okay, what are the challenges that every stakeholder has, and how do we address that to create a more resilient future for your product, your business, your brand, etc.
And also, of course, there's something we cannot forget, and I think it's one of the most important things we've gotten in this environment, and is government and legislation around these topics. So, which kind of regulatory changes are needed for these innovations to take place and make sustainable food chains?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I can't speak very much to Mexico or Latin America, but in the U.S., and I would imagine that tremendous change needs to happen in every country, in every government, in every region. I think we're still far behind. But in the U.S., probably the biggest change and the biggest challenge that causes unsustainable practices is a policy that comes out of the U.S. Farm Bill, which is the largest piece of legislation in the U.S. It's every 5 years, is passed, and part of that is something that encourages farmers to grow unsustainably, specifically because it's called the crop insurance program. And so there's insurance, that's payment to farmers to grow no matter what happens. So no matter what they do, and even if they fail, it almost encourages failure. And so they end up growing unsustainable crops in unsustainable ways, clearing more land in order to plant more crops because they'll actually get paid if those crops fail. And that's actually more than the money that's spent on subsidizing production of crops. So that's a really important change that needs to happen. But there are some positive things that are happening. There's, a lot of programs and funding for sustainable practices. I think that governments around the world need to focus on alternative proteins and how do we encourage diversity, and how can we encourage farmers to grow diverse crops in appropriate regions in appropriate ways to support the product development and make ingredients that are more sustainable more abundant, so that companies can innovate and have an easier time bringing products to market.
And what do you think that will happen in the future with food industry in following the sustainability way that we have until now?
Yeah, I think the future is bright because education is happening at such a fast rate, and people are starting to really care. The more that people learn about how important sustainability is, about the impacts, about things like hurricanes, destroying all of southeastern US almost and having tremendous impact across the world, the more that sustainability will begin to become important. And so, I think that reformulating land management, ingredient protein development, all of those will see a very different future, and we'll have a better relationship with our food in the future because of that. So, yeah.